and I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon. My first task today is to actually share with you a welcome address from Dr. Lisa Cameron MP, and it'll just take us a few minutes to put that together for you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Cameron MP, and I'd like to welcome everyone to Unlocking the Potential of Disabled Entrepreneurs, which is the first of 2 debates hosted by Birkbeck University. I'm delighted to invite you to these debates in my capacity as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Inclusive Entrepreneurship in the House of Commons. We are currently working through a 2-year programme to inform parliamentarians about how they can support and upscale the sector. So I'm sure this debate will inform policymakers on how they ensure disabled entrepreneurs do not get left behind during and following this pandemic. This is a continuation of research funded by the Regional Studies Association on regional inequalities and innovation opportunities for Black, Asian and minority ethnic people alongside people with disabilities. So I'd like to thank the Centre for Innovation Management Research at Birkbeck University and the panel today for doing all the work that they're doing to ensure that we continue to change the narrative on this important issue. It's really important that everyone can achieve their full potential in society. And that's why I want to champion this important work and make sure that those entrepreneurs who have disabilities right across the United Kingdom and beyond are able to gain the support that they need to start their enterprises, to scale up, and to employ others, making sure that they contribute to our economy in a very positive way. So thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for coming along today to make sure that you take part in this important debate. We want to hear from everybody involved, and I want to wish you all the best for your work moving forward. Thank you once again from the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Inclusive Entrepreneurship and from myself, Dr. Lisa Cameron MP.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful address from Dr. Cameron, certainly in terms of the APPG and the work that we're doing and the work that Birkbeck is championing. She's extremely supportive. I understand there might be a little bit of a tech issue in terms of Dr. Cameron's address, but what we will do is put it in the chat for you, so you'll be able to actually copy it and look at it at your leisure. I'm delighted to chair this important debate on a subject that I'm very passionate about, and I'd like to thank Professor Helen Lawton-Smith from Birkbeck for giving me this opportunity. I'd also like to thank my esteemed colleagues for joining us today on our panel, and I will introduce them to you individually later when I pose a question to them. Our running order today will be, we'll look briefly at the abstract. I'll be putting a question to each panel member. And what I'd ask of you is, whilst they're actually speaking, if you could be thinking of questions and put them in the chat. Those of you that have been on Zoom before know it's difficult to see everybody and try to capture everybody who wants to speak. So we've decided to ask you to put your questions in chat. And when all of the presenters have spoken, we will open the Q&A and we will select 2 questions for each of the panel. And I'm sure we'll get enough to do 2. And we'll see how that goes. If there's more time, we will open the floor. And equally, if there are questions we don't answer, I'm sure the people from Birkbeck or ourselves will come back to you if you have anything specifically. Thank you. So just to remind us that this event forms part of the activities of the Birkbeck School of Business, Informatics and the Economics Impact Grant. And this is funded, now I'm going to get this name wrong, but Asha's time. And she's been organising all the logistics around this, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very welcome. It's also a continuation of Professor Helen Lawton-Smith's research, and Birkbeck is leading in this area. It's really exciting to be part of the work that they're doing, and I'm very honoured to be a visiting fellow. It's funded by the Regional Studies Association, looking at regional inequalities in innovation. and opportunities for Black, Asian and minority ethnic people and disabled groups. If we look at the abstract that we presented today, this is an emerging sector. We know there's an increase of number, in particular disabled people, who are looking to self-employment as they struggle to get into mainstream employment. What we're hearing is it's changing, but it's not changing quickly enough. And people are starting to see the opportunities within entrepreneurship, but it comes with its challenges. We know the pandemic has increased those challenges for our sector. And if we look at the disability employment gap, we've had some figures in our abstract that talk about it's increased by 0.7% in 2020. The employment rate of disabled people is 28.8% lower than that of people who are not disabled. We've seen other issues looking at the gender gap, the cost of doing business. Being a disabled entrepreneur is just the same as any other entrepreneur. We face difficulties, but there are some that are specific to the disability-related issues we have. We know there's not a lack of academic research in this area. A literature review that we've referred you to highlighted the lack of such academic research. And we also know that as a result of that research and the work that's done in the Inclusive Entrepreneur Network and other networks, we created the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Inclusive Entrepreneurship, which has a very ambitious and challenging 2-year programme of work. The government's Levelling Up agenda seeks to level up research and development so that it benefits every corner of the UK. We now have an opportunity for clear policy rationale for increasing diversity and inclusion and innovation-led initiatives at a regional level as we establish inclusive working practice. For our event, our aim is to challenge the understanding of our audience on self-employment for disabled people. What is it really all about? What are the issues? What can we look at to change things, and what policy decisions need to be put in place to make things better, to support and upscale the sector? We're looking at key issues, and these are the questions that I'm going to present to our panel members shortly, but I will reiterate them as we go at this point. What is leading disabled people into entrepreneurship? What are the challenges faced by disabled entrepreneurs and the networks that they support? What kind of support is available and needed for disabled entrepreneurs in the UK? And the final question I will pose is, what needs to change in current policies affecting disabled entrepreneurs? Okay. If you want any further information about the research that's been taking place at Birkbeck, please do contact Helen Norton-Smith and her colleagues, and I'm sure they'll be delighted to help you. What I'm going to do now is actually introduce you as I pose the question to each of our panellists. So my first question I'm going to address to Dr. Eva Kašperová, but I'll just tell you a little bit about Eva first. So Eva's a research fellow at the Centre of Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship at Aston Business School, with interest in inclusive entrepreneurship, enterprise policy and support. Her doctoral research looked at the experiences of disabled people and those with long-term health conditions who were starting or running a business in the UK. Eva has published in journals such as the International Small Business Journal and the International Journal of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Prior to joining, it's abbreviated CIMR, Eva was a lecturer at Manchester University and a research assistant at Small Business Research Centre in Kingston University, London. The question I'm going to pose to Eva is, when I can find it, thank you. What is leading disabled people into entrepreneurship?
Thank you, Jacqueline, for that introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure being here, and thank you to Jacqueline and Helen for inviting me to contribute to this important conversation. So I'll get straight to the question. What leads disabled people to entrepreneurship? Entrepreneurship is a key route into work for many disabled people and people with long-term impairments and health conditions. in the UK, disabled people with work-limiting conditions are more likely to become self-employed than non-disabled people. And some of the main reasons or motivations for becoming self-employed are very similar to those cited by entrepreneurs in general. So, for instance, financial rewards of entrepreneurship, or wanting to be your own boss and to have more autonomy. But there are also more specific disability-related reasons or drivers for wanting to become self-employed that I want to talk a bit more about. But before doing that, I think it's important to recognize that disabled people are a hugely diverse group, and I'd like to touch on this briefly, if I may. When I talk about disabled people, I usually mean people who self-identify as disabled, as well as people with long-term impairments and health conditions who perhaps do not necessarily see themselves as disabled, but may have been affected by disability. Disabled people are a hugely diverse group in terms of impairment and health condition type, severity, onset, whether their condition is relatively stable, progressive, or whether it fluctuates over time. We know that some impairments and health conditions can be work limiting, while others pose no limitations to work. And while some conditions are visible, others are less visible or hidden. Additionally, disabled people differ by various other characteristics, including educational achievement, prior work experience, socioeconomic background, and other characteristics that can importantly influence their entrepreneurial motivation and their experience of entrepreneurship. But despite despite this diversity, there is one of the key kind of drivers or motivations for becoming self-employed for disabled people in the UK and in other countries is this desire to have greater control and flexibility over work tasks, hours worked, and location, which enables people to fit work around a particular impairment or health condition, as well as other commitments. And this is particularly important for people with work-limiting conditions who perhaps prefer to work part-time or are able to work limited hours only, and also people who require more flexibility, for whom the usual 9 to 5 doesn't really work. Now, we know that many disabled people leave traditional employment because they find that their employers are inflexible, or they cannot accommodate the specific needs, or they find that their workplace environment is just unsuitable. And in some of the worst cases, disabled people leave employment when they experience discrimination or negative attitudes towards disability, which leads some then to become self-employed. Now, additionally, like most entrepreneurs, disabled entrepreneurs often create a new business when they recognize that there is a gap in the market for a particular product or service. And from my own research, I found that many disabled entrepreneurs offer a range of mainstream products to mainstream customers, but I also found that there is a sizable group that offers specific disability-related products or services to disabled customers, or to a niche group of customers with a particular impairment or health conditions. So, for instance, it may be mobility aids or assistive technologies offered to people with mobility difficulties. And some of the kind of key motivations for these entrepreneurs is that they often have, they've had their own experience or lived experience of disability, and they recognize that there was some of the products that they needed were missing in the mainstream market. So they came up with their own products or services, and they for their own needs initially, but then they kind of later recognized that there is a wider need in the market for those products, and so they turned their idea into an actual business, and that would serve disabled customers who are otherwise underserved by mainstream businesses in the mainstream market. Another key motivation that I found, on this, actually, in other words, what is important to highlight is that disability can actually be an important source of ideas for products and services that kind of leads to entrepreneurship. And then another key motivation that I wanted to highlight is that there is often among disabled people this desire to to make a difference or to contribute to society. And we know from the existing research that disabled people are more likely than non-disabled people in general, to set up a social enterprise. And again, this is something I found in my own research, that many entrepreneurs who I spoke to, they offer specific disability-related products or services, mainly services, to mainstream customers. And this is very often large organizations across sectors, whereby the mission often is, the mission of the social enterprise is to transform the existing kind of attitudes and practices that perhaps disadvantage disabled people in the mainstream society. And some examples of the services are, for instance, diversity training or accessibility consultancy. And again, motivation there for these entrepreneurs often is that they themselves may have had a negative experience of disability, and they really want to kind of change the working and living conditions for disabled people in society. And the final point that I wanted to highlight is that entrepreneurship can also be an important kind of coping mechanism for some disabled people, particularly for those who may have acquired impairment or health condition later in life. And this is because often becoming disabled can be a traumatic experience for some people that can kind of disrupt one's identity, one's sense of self. And it can also generate strong feelings such as anger, frustration, or even hopelessness. And what I found with some of the entrepreneurs that I spoke to is that they very often kind of try to almost channel that, those strong feelings and the new knowledge that they kind of acquire, the new experience of being disabled into, into doing something positive, like starting a business. And it often is a kind of means of kind of coping with the new way of with the major change in their life. And to conclude, I'd like to kind of just say, so disabled entrepreneurs kind of are driven to entrepreneurship for a variety of reasons. And it is also clear that they contribute hugely to society and to economy. But I think it's also important to highlight, as Jacqueline said earlier, that our understanding of disabled entrepreneurs is relatively limited if you compare that with some of the other underrepresented and disadvantaged groups, such as ethnic minorities, migrants, or women. And so I'd like to kind of, I guess, finish my talk with a call for more research in this area. And I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very eloquently, and I might say as well from my own personal experience and members of our network and the APPG, a very accurate reflection of the life experiences we've had relayed to us. So thank you so much. Now, as I said, please put your questions in the chat, and what we will do, we'll come back to you after all of the speakers have actually answered their question. I'm now going to introduce you to Beth Kume-Holland. So Beth is the founder of Patchwork Hub and a wonderful organisation called, it's abbreviated, but I think it's MOCOM. I hope I'm saying that correctly. She's a Harvard University Kennedy Scholar, an Oxford University graduate, and an international disability rights advocate. Beth's previous roles include Citibank's thought leadership team for the Global Perspective Solution Series, Unilever as a research fellow, and at Oxford University. 2 moments, please, we do. Thank you. It's great on Zoom, or anything can happen. She recently worked as an audience and market insight lead at Scope, the UK disability charity, but is now the founder and director of MOCOM and the award-winning tech startup and social enterprise Patchwork Hub. Now, the question I'm going to pose to Beth today, 2 seconds. Okay, we'll be right back with you. One moment, slight technical hitch. Okay. What are the challenges faced by disabled entrepreneurs and their relevant support networks, please, Beth?
Thanks, Jacqueline, for the introduction. And I'm really thrilled to be joining today for this really important conversation. So there are lots of barriers that disabled entrepreneurs face. From my own experience as a disabled entrepreneur, I think whether it's spaces, physical or virtual, being accessible, barriers in acquiring funding through traditional mainstream avenues, combined with all the extra costs associated with being disabled, the level of challenges are definitely exceptionally high sometimes. And that's why support networks as well are such a lifeline in keeping people going. For me and others, a key support network has been the Inclusive Entrepreneur Network, and it's been really important in providing me with vital support. So just to give a bit of background on how the network started, the CEO is a disabled entrepreneur who founded the network in 2013 as a direct response to acquiring a disability in work, which led to her losing her job at the height of her career. Now, I founded Patchwork Hub through a very similar journey, and I'm more than happy to go into my own story as a disabled entrepreneur in the mainstream space if there's time in the Q&A or if anyone has any questions. But I think most helpful for now would be to share with the panel and attendees today an overview of the challenges faced by individual disabled entrepreneurs within our network and those who are members of the APPG for Inclusive Entrepreneurship. So in terms of challenges individual disabled entrepreneurs face, they fall into two main categories: either individuals seeking employment, entering the job market, or those who've acquired a disability whilst in the workplace and lost their job as a result of this. So prior to joining our network, our members reported various challenges and observations. So a key challenge and observation is that accessibility and disability awareness just isn't centred in a lot of mainstream support structures, while disability support often isn't set up for people becoming self-employed, despite the benefits around flexibility that it can offer, as Dr. Eva was highlighting. So for example, for members using Job Centre Plus, they note that at the point of seeking or attempting to return to employment, there's often very little discussion around the possibility of becoming self-employed as a real sustainable pathway and alternative to mainstream employment. So should it be considered by the individual themselves, the pathway, if it's suggested at all, often concentrates on elements around bookkeeping, marketing, and those aspects, not how you can effectively navigate the long-term health condition as an entrepreneur, which is ultimately something that you can't really develop a successful business without thinking about. So for those who choose the route of self-employment, support is patchy and not always responsive to the individual needs of the entrepreneur and its delivery, such as inflexible deadlines and even around accommodating health. So next, I'd say the main experiences of many members acquiring the practical disability-related support they need is limited to the UK's government's Access to Work Award. And I think it's worth going into a little bit of detail about the scheme. So I think the first really important thing to note is what an amazing initiative the award is. The intent behind the award is envied across the world, both in terms of the underlying innovative concept and the monetary value that can be awarded. And when it works well, it's genuinely game-changing. However, issues sometimes arise when there's conflict between this good intent and the administration of the awards, with some of the key criteria at odds with what would be expected of non-disabled peers. So, for example, you're required to evidence business viability within 12 months and often regularly have to review and re-evidence your requirements, with the risk of losing your award always hanging over your head, which can be a real source of anxiety and potentially catastrophic for your business if it were to happen. In addition, the Access to Work Award is purely to provide disability-related support, but members struggle to access the equally essential startup and scale-up programs needed to run their businesses effectively, because these are often inaccessible. Now, in an ideal world, disabled entrepreneurs would be able to take part in mainstream startup programs, but the mainstream startup space is in so many ways disappointingly inaccessible. So much so that for a lot of disabled entrepreneurs, not only do they fail to get an equal chance to compete and sit with others in the room, they often can't even get into the room in the first place, metaphorically and literally. And there's actually a discussion to be had about whether these two elements of disability-specific support and broader business support should be contained within a single award, and feedback and studies from the network support this. So this actually links to another key challenge disabled entrepreneurs face: finance and funding. So there's a couple of strands to this that I think are worth teasing out. One is the interaction between work and the benefits and support disabled people can receive. In my work with disabled job seekers through Patchwork Hub, I've now lost count of the number of people I've encountered who are worried about how employment may impact the support they rely upon. For example, things such as the limitations around the benefit system and the 16-hour limit on working hours. If you're disabled and seeking employment, you might end up on enterprise support allowance, which has high interest-backed loans that can leave disabled entrepreneurs in a really vulnerable position. And there isn't an awareness that mainstream business support might need to be adjusted for the needs of disabled people. Next, for disabled entrepreneurs, traditional routes to finance and fund your enterprise are sometimes just not viable. The mainstream startup space often glorifies burnout work patterns, while the traditional route of starting your own business that a lot of non-disabled people take as a sort of side hustle alongside paid employment is just not sustainable or possible for a lot of disabled entrepreneurs. And building on that, access to traditional financing routes can be difficult, both in terms of the accessibility of the process and certain criteria that can disproportionately impact people with disabilities. So, for example, banks not understanding that a lot of disabled people might not have an excellent credit rating due to previous barriers. Similarly, finding startup and scale-up programs which were authentically inclusive and didn't require investor return was a real challenge for a lot of our members. And one final point on the financial challenges is there's lots of additional costs disabled entrepreneurs face because of their disability. So a Scope study found that disability price tag, or the average associated extra cost of living with a disability, was £583 a month. The APPG on social enterprise found that marginalised social entrepreneurs, and particularly disabled people, need greater amounts of funding to get through the next financial year. There's some really incredible organisations that support social entrepreneurs, such as Unlimited, who I can't recommend enough for their work. There's also new initiatives such as Parallel and Hatch's Purple Sock Day, which launched just last week, and that aims to shine a much needed light on these sorts of challenges that disabled entrepreneurs are facing. But despite this, awareness of a lot of the support and advice that's out there and on offer is often low and fragmented. So yes, all of these strands combine and make it very difficult and sometimes impossible for disabled entrepreneurs to access the finance and funding they need. And I think something I've definitely experienced too with my own work is the lack of awareness of the ambition and capabilities of a disabled person. I've genuinely been in conversations speaking to investors about raising a 300k seed round, but as soon as it comes up I'm disabled and what my conditions are, within the space of the conversation, I watch my valuation drop, and by the end of it, we've downgraded to talking about 30k rather than 300k. I think a big issue is that until awareness of disability in the mainstream is higher, and specifically awareness of the barriers that are stopping people, the sector will remain siloed and disabled people will only be represented as experts on disability-related products and services, when in actual fact, we need to normalise disabled people being experts in areas that are not solely disability-related. So I've outlined quite a few challenges facing disabled entrepreneurs there, but coming back to the Inclusive Entrepreneur Network and the work that we do, the key support elements within the network that we've developed really help to address a number of these barriers. So from regular Friday briefings that have been a lifeline to many throughout the pandemic, bespoke startup support for managing your business and disability through to peer support, strategy coaching and mentoring, its programs are helping so many entrepreneurs. We've also held multiple inclusive events, including the first ever co-designed collaboration with Facebook aimed at disabled people. However, as incredible as the support is from a network like the Inclusive Entrepreneur, ultimately what's really required are significant policy changes to effectively support the individual entrepreneurs and upscale the sector. These are certainly contained within the Inclusive Entrepreneur Network's recommendation to the UK government during the pandemic, which have gone on to form the 2-year programme of works with the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Inclusive Entrepreneurship, another excellent forum and network which I'm sure we'll discuss further. So I hope that's started to answer your question and outline some of the key challenges that so many disabled entrepreneurs face. I found out myself how support structures like the Inclusive Entrepreneur Network can be a game changer for a disabled entrepreneur, but we also mustn't lose sight of some of the fundamental policy changes that are needed for true progress. So I think it's so important with conversations like this to keep momentum building.
Thank you so much, Beth. I think you've covered that incredibly well, and definitely an accurate reflection of representations from the network and the APPG. And I think I would echo the element of, for all of the networks, as hard as we work and as accessible and inclusive as we make our programmes, without those policy changes, we'll never get over that last hurdle. So I'm hoping what does come out from today and the work that follows his clear recommendations on how government can actually support us all going forward. Thank you so much. And again, any questions for Beth, and we'll take them at the end of the, when all of the panelists have answered their question. Thank you so much. I'd like now to introduce you to David Walsh. So David Walsh is the managing partner of Flamefinch Partners, the chairman of Supernotes, which is a leading collaborative learning solution, and the chairman of Malta Business Network UK. In 1996, he founded Crimson Wing. And can I just check everyone can hear me, because I've disappeared off screen? If somebody can give me a nod. Yeah, lovely, thank you very much. I thought I'd lost my Zoom then. The software company that he grew to a business of 500 staff across Europe before being acquired by KPMG. Past chair roles include Thrive Partners and Level Global. And David is the King's College London's Entrepreneur in Residence, a very exciting role. And David funds the David Walsh Award at King's to recognise excellence in entrepreneurship. David was the winner of the Helen Hudson Award, the King's Alumni of the Year 2020, and was awarded a Fellowship of King's College in 2021. And David also, to put things in context today, co-chairs with myself the Accelerator, although we may not use that name going forward, Task and Finish Group of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Inclusive Entrepreneurship. And your question, David, is what kind of support is available and needed for disabled entrepreneurs in the UK?
Thank you, Jacqueline, and nice to meet you all on Zoom. And what a great introduction! Thank you. I wonder who wrote that. I've been only relatively recently had my kind of eyes opened by the challenges and the opportunities actually presented by inclusive entrepreneurship. I think it's a really exciting area to be involved with. And I've spoken to quite a lot of inclusive entrepreneurs, and what you do get, and you do get it with all entrepreneurs, I think, is this passion and commitment and resilience, which is extremely powerful. But you also get this sense of frustration, and I think picking up from what Beth said as well, it must be frustrating, mustn't it, when you've got a great business idea, and as soon as someone says or becomes aware that there might be something around disability, it all kind of evaporates, okay, that kind of commitment. So, I'm really keen to see if I can actually help to kind of turn the cogs a bit more in our favor on this, because there are some really exciting businesses out there, both active and potential. And that's really amazing, I think. And on to motivation as well, I felt I picked up with what Eva was saying, but a lot of inclusive entrepreneurs are also looking not to be dependent on benefits, very proud, very active. Yes, they want the flexibility, but they want to prove that they can actually make a contribution. And I think that's, again, really, really powerful. But when you look at the support that's out there, and I have to put, I think the inclusive universal inclusion and the patchwork having to one side on this, but it is very fragmented, and some of it's really amateurish actually, and not joined up at all. And it's a really mixed bag. And even where venture capitalists have looked at investing in startups which are run by, let's call it, disabled founders, they've clearly struggled to make sense of it and actually have not been very successful. Okay, so I think the point I want to make is that to go forward, it isn't just about the support that's required for the disabled entrepreneur. It's surely got to be the support that's required for mentors, so they understand what it means to mentor disabled entrepreneurs. It has to be about supporting the VCs. We've got surely to have different KPIs for this. It's got to be about potentially providing support for co-founders who may be, not disabled, but part of the team, and what that means to work together as a team. It has to be to attract the right experts in, okay, to do that. So when you look at the support that's required, it has to tackle all those areas, not just from the disabled entrepreneur's perspective. Okay, it has to work together. And what you do find out there, and I think this is quite interesting that with Birkbeck, because a lot of the business accelerators that are out there, the normal ones, let's call them, they are now becoming more attached to academic institutions. And also, it's only just starting, but they're quite general. Okay, so most accelerators will take all types of businesses in. Okay, but they won't particularly necessarily focus on a particular type of entrepreneur or a particular sector, although that is changing gradually, and that's quite interesting as well. But the other thing about them is they're selective. So if you're applying for these accelerators, even if you can attend a campus, and that might not be that practical, but you've got to get in the first place, which means the KPIs are quite challenging, aren't they? Because they're to do with job creation probably, or to do with how much investment you might be able to raise through the process. Okay, that's how they might measure the success of an accelerator, which may not be the right KPIs for a disabled entrepreneur. Okay, so I think if you think about a lot of what we've heard as well, disabled entrepreneurs, the first stage, isn't it, is to perhaps become a sole trader, not necessarily build a scalable business, but that scalable business could well follow if there's a niche or a product or service which gets some traction. I guess where I'm going with all this is that something needs to change. Okay, my personal view is that something around, and I don't like to call it an accelerator, but some kind of business-centric hub needs to be formed, which is specifically elective and not selective for disabled entrepreneurs. In other words, you can elect to join, where you will find people who are really, really interested in helping and supporting disabled entrepreneurs. And I think we need to turn it 180 degrees, okay, and have that kind of put the disabled entrepreneur at the center of the hub, not at the outside knocking on the door trying to get in, if that makes sense. Okay, I think we need to put the disabled entrepreneur at the center, and we need to provide incentives. And I know I think there's some talk on policies, but when you look at the British Bank for loans, for soft loans, when you look at SEIS loans for investors, when you look at R&D tax credits and so on and so forth, okay, none of them take into account anything to do with whether an entrepreneur is disabled or not. Okay, now wouldn't it be interesting if for tax incentives there was a higher tax incentive, because potentially there's maybe higher risk in supporting a disabled entrepreneur. What is wrong with that? Okay, why can't we do that kind of thing? Okay, so I've got lots of ideas, but I've used my time up. Okay, so there might be some questions later, but back to you, Jacqueline. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just check I'm not muted. Thank you so much, David. And again, very eloquently posed. And it's wonderful working alongside you within the APPG on this specific area, because everything you've echoed today, the APPG is working on these issues, and we've had some real successes, but there's still a long way to go. So, for example, and I think one of the things that people are talking about is finance a lot of the time, and we have approached the traditional banking system on this, and we are working with them. But again, sometimes it's not moving quickly enough. It's quite an enormous task for them to put these things in place. But what I would say is that all chatting with the APPG, they're all working towards this. And what we've also seen happen, which has been really exciting, is where sometimes you have to, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're a disabled entrepreneur, very resilient and have to think about different ways of doing things. So, for example, when the banks aren't moving quickly enough, what we then did within the APPG is speak with people from the lending standards boards. The lending standard board can actually start to give very clear guidance and advice to the banks on how they can increase their lending facilities to minority groups and particularly disabled people. So sometimes it's just finding a different way around this as well to sort of speed things along. But absolutely, nothing that we're discussing today really stands in isolation. And I think echoing what David has said and what the APPG and the entrepreneurs within the network and other networks are saying, it's co-design and collaboration that's going to take this forward. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to our final panelist. And again, please put any questions for David in the chat and we'll come back to them. If I could now introduce David Halabiski. I hope that's said correctly, David. David is an economist in the OECD Centre for Entrepreneurship, for SMEs, regions and cities. He currently works on several projects related to the entrepreneurship policy, including a multi-year project on inclusive entrepreneurship. He's the main author of the Missing Entrepreneur reports. And the third question, which I'm going to put to David, is what needs to change in current policies affecting these communities?
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Good afternoon, everybody. It has been a pleasure to listen to the intervention so far today, and it's also nice to see some familiar faces on the screen. Thank you for the invitation. For those of you who don't know, the OECD is an international intergovernmental organization. We have 38 member countries, and of course the UK is one of our members. And our role is to try to facilitate dialogue across governments so that they can discuss their challenges and try to learn about what each other are doing to address these challenges. So I tell you that just to let you know that I'm coming from a fairly high-level perspective where we're looking at what is happening in this policy area, basically around the world. And it's been great to listen to the speakers, as I said, because what governments really need to do is listen to people like Beth. I mean, Beth very clearly outlined a lot of the challenges that are faced by people in this community. And what governments need to do more of is listen. And once you understand the challenges and the issues, it's not so difficult to reverse engineer some of them to find solutions. And so I wanted to make essentially 4 main points today about what I think governments need to do better in this policy area. First is I think that they can do more to help create entrepreneurial identities within the various disability communities. Now, Eva said at the beginning that in the UK, people from these communities are slightly more likely to be involved in self-employment and entrepreneurship than overall average, but that's not necessarily true in many countries. And so I think, if you're going to start somewhere, you need to help create an awareness that people from these communities can be entrepreneurs. And in fact, there are many very successful examples, many of which we've got in this call today. But the challenge for governments is that they're not always visible, which might be a choice, and that's fine. But what we're trying to do right now is raise visibility around this issue and try to educate governments so that they can better design their policies and the programs. And in terms of building an entrepreneurial identity within the communities, of course, the main approaches used by governments are to promote role models, use award programs. But I think we need to go beyond that and look at how some of the more general support programs are presented. And often when you look at the way these initiatives are designed, the way they're promoted, the way the materials are presented on the web, they still very often present a sort of young male image of an entrepreneur, often with a technology slant. And this, of course, projects an impression as to what an entrepreneur is. And so we need to put greater efforts into trying to change that stereotype. Secondly, if you look across OECD countries at the types of support that are offered, and I'm talking about tailored and dedicated support for various disability communities, most of the programs and initiatives tend to be very small and very narrowly targeted. And that's often because they're driven by non-government organizations that have a very specific focus and a very specific membership. And some of these programs are very good. Some of these programs are very successful. But what we need to do is scale up these activities, share these good practices, and try to replicate them and do them on a larger scale. Now, the positive thing about this type of approach is that we often see partnerships between governments, partnerships with the private sector, and also with various organizations within the disability community. And this is very important because when you bring all of these actors together, you have the knowledge, like people who, like Beth and some of the other speakers have, who can educate both the private sector and the government. And so this partnership is quite important. And as David said, the other element of this is that we need to ensure that the support organizations themselves are equipped to help the entrepreneurs. This includes those who are delivering tailored and dedicated support, as well as the more general support organizations. Third is the issue of accessibility. And I'm using that in a very broad sense. I think overall, when we're looking at inclusive entrepreneurship, we need to improve the accessibility of the business support system. And when we're looking at entrepreneurs from disabled communities, I think the attitudes of the main actors in the support system need to change. I think this is a critical point. I mean, we heard this earlier from some of the people who were speaking. If there is an attitude of the investor or of the people running training programs about what an entrepreneur is, that is probably going to influence who they select into their program. So we need to do a lot more to educate these actors and to ensure that they have a more open approach to who they support. The second element of accessibility is about physical accessibility. Where are these facilities located? Are they close to public transit networks, or are they difficult to reach and they require a car, which might prevent some people from being able to get to the facilities? And then once you get to the building, I mean, is the room accessible? Are the materials in the classroom or the training room suitable for all of the entrepreneurs who might be interested in using the support? I think there's still a long way to go in that respect. And third, and perhaps even most important, is the virtual accessibility. I think one of the things that we've very clearly seen over the past year and a half with the COVID-19 pandemic is that the governments are moving a lot of their support programs online. While this does increase the flexibility in the way that these supports are delivered, it also creates barriers in other ways. Despite the legal requirements for websites to be accessible, particularly public websites, we know that many of them are still not accessible, which of course can be a huge barrier for some people from disability communities. And fourth, and finally, I think the most difficult challenge is also one that's been highlighted earlier, and that is the way that benefit systems interact with income. And this interaction is quite important because we have to balance many different issues here. We've got issues of incentives and motivations. And then from a public accountability perspective, there's also an issue of accountability for how public funds are used and the risk that there might be abuse. So it's not at all a simple issue, but there are still some simple solutions that could be implemented more widely. Often there are thresholds, as we heard earlier, where certain revenue thresholds are met, benefits are removed, or certain hours worked thresholds are met, benefits are removed. But a simple solution is to increase the use of the way that support is scaled back. We can see various examples of this in different countries, different types of support. For example, some countries have exemptions for social security contributions, for example, but then once that temporary exemption is over, it doesn't kick back right to zero. It goes back over a longer period of time to help the entrepreneur adjust. And there are other examples. Denmark is another one that comes to mind. They have a system called flexi jobs, which allows for case-by-case decisions to be made about how benefits are applied when income is earned. And those who are operating their own business and self-employed are also covered by this flexi job system. It's not only those who are working as employees. So those are a few quick ideas that I have. And I'll just end by letting you know that we are about to produce a new report on this issue of how can policy be improved to support entrepreneurs from various disabled communities. And this report was already presented to several committees, and these are bodies at the OECD with government representatives, and the report has been approved. There was high level of interest, and so that will probably be published in about November. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to any questions that anybody may have or further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Some incredible insight there, and it's really good to get an idea of the kind of policy globally on this. And just reflecting on some of the things that you put forward, and two in particular, I'd like to sort of tease out from that at this point. One is the issue around what we might call legacy benefits, because we do see time and time again entrepreneurs who, again, sometimes within the UK and possibly within other countries, they're measured in terms of their turnover, and that's how the success is measured. And equally, often that actually indicates whether they get the very practical support that they need. We have a number of entrepreneurs who, if you were to measure them solely by their turnover, they would not be deemed viable. However, and I'll refer to one in particular, one of our entrepreneurs, Ability Today, who actually is within that position. And, you know, those of you that are in that legacy benefit situation, it's not an easy thing to navigate, and it's certainly one that people wouldn't necessarily willingly come out of for fear of not getting back into it. But equally, the work he does, he runs an academy which trains disabled people to become journalists. That's massive, not just in terms of providing possible future employment for those individuals, but if you think of that in terms of how that will put disabled people firmly in the media, very visible role models going forward, yet the current system actually could leave him in a very difficult position. So very definitely in terms of policy, taking things forward, those kind of things really need to be looked at. And again, going back to your comments around this sort of joined up thinking and joined up way of doing things. And you're right. I mean, in the co-authored report that I did with my colleagues from Africa and Europe, when you look at this globally, the policy needs to be almost like consistent. There's got to be, I think everything all of you have said, if you kind of pull it all together and put it in this new idea of what a hub might look like, and policy responses reflected everything we've said here today, it would be a wonderful way forward. So thank you so much, David. So what I'm going to do now is just move us on to our Q&A session. There's two things I want to just say. I know we might try to slow this down a bit, because I understand some of the captioning has been quite quick today, so we might just slow things down a little bit as we go into the Q&A session. We've got a bit more time than we anticipated we would have at this point. And equally, try again, if you're on Zoom, trying to navigate the Zoom chat and make sure we pick up everything, and the questions will take us a little bit of time. And whilst we do that, I wonder if I could possibly ask Kevin from Unlimited if he'd be prepared just to perhaps do a short address explaining to delegates today about the organisation. I know from our organisation, a number of our entrepreneurs have been successful in acquiring funding from yourselves, and I wondered if you'd be prepared just to talk a little bit about it whilst we pull our questions together. Thank you. Well, I think we might need to unmute you, Kevin. We'll just do that for you. I think just 1 second, you'll be unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Jacqueline. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today and really welcome this event. It's fantastic to see a much needed has already been discussed, I think. At Unlimited, the Foundation for Social Entrepreneurs, we find, fund and support people to start and scale up social enterprises across the UK. But we're especially eager to do so for the social enterprises that we think have the greatest potential to achieve the most considerable social impact. And the analysis that we've done on the social ventures that we've backed over the years has shown that on average, social entrepreneurs who have lived experience of the issues that they're working to address stand a greater chance of achieving greater social impact. And for that reason, as well as I think compelling arguments about sort of social progression and inclusion, we've been upping our ambitions to be much more inclusive in the way that we do find and fund and support social entrepreneurs, to the point now where we have a target of 50% in supporting social entrepreneurs who may identify as Black, Asian or minority ethnic or disabled. And we've been able to surpass that target in the funds that we've been dispersing during COVID, and certainly intend to do so coming out of the COVID crisis as well. I think, Jacqueline, for some of the key arguments for particularly reaching out to sort of disabled social entrepreneurs, present and future, for this additional support. Some of those arguments have, I think, already been articulated really clearly. I think, Beth was, I think, talking very convincingly about how unattractive the current support offer is for especially disabled people looking to set up an enterprise. The level of sort of financial support that's available to someone wishing to do that is really, to be frank, quite inadequate. And the sort of interest that is offered on the standard loans that people will be introduced to as well is not very attractive, and I think is quite sort of daunting and off-putting to people that have aspirations to set up a really competitive venture and a really impactful one. So Unlimited is doing everything it can to provide that sort of funding and support gap to fill that, but we recognise we can't do that on our own. Our startup grant is like up to 5,000. Our support for growing ventures is like 15,000, and then after that we're typically providing social investment wherever possible. But we know that the average disabled social entrepreneur running an established venture is looking for more than £50,000 in support just to get through the next financial year right now, and that's above the average compared to other social ventures with different experience and conditions. So I think much more needs to be done, and we're certainly sort of looking to the government and the opportunities that are coming out of the National Disability Strategy, as well as the government's wider work, as part of the levelling up agenda and recovering from COVID-19 economically, really looking at what more we can persuade, hopefully, the government to do to help us in filling that gap in access to advice and access to funding that could really help to ensure that there are no longer sort of unfulfilled ideas that could really be transformative in society. It would be great if we could get to a position where anyone who has an idea, whatever their background, has a genuine opportunity to realize it.
Super, thank you so much. And you know, I can attest to I mean, obviously, I hadn't realised you were attending today, and when I was wanting to talk about Grant is one of your recipients, I believe. So, you know, with the right support, it does work. Okay, thank you. So we've got a few comments and questions. One I'm just going to deal with straight away, and we'll do it really quickly. People are asking about the APPG. So we've put something in the chat in relation to the APPG and the network. So in terms of how you become involved with the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Inclusive Entrepreneurship, you should be able to see the 2-year work programme, but I'm just going to very quickly run through that. So at the moment, the APPG is looking to produce a national evidence-based report. It's already started to submit written and oral parliamentary questions and has been really successful. For example, waiving the requirement of disabled entrepreneurs to meet the turnover level in order to retain their access to work award because of the pandemic. Holds events with parliamentarians and key members of the community. Is developing a programme which will take entrepreneurship and put it firmly on the agenda within schools, colleges and universities. If you remember saying earlier that crucial time when people are starting to think about career development. And we're not going to use this word, but we were looking to create an accelerator programme. We're going to think of a different name for that. David's put some wonderful ideas forward around that particular piece of work. To upscale the network, I think, as everybody said today, it can't sit in isolation and it has to include a number of dynamic areas to it. We did launch an awards programme, and those awards are within the Houses of Commons and talking about it's the innovation that the entrepreneurs are creating which is being celebrated. Linking with the stock exchange, which we'll see in 2022 for the first time, the top 30 businesses that are run by disabled people, and that's not looking at turnover, that's looking at innovation, which is really exciting. So that's just to reply in respect of those things. I'm going to hand over to Sarah now. Sarah's picked up some specific questions and comments that she's going to put to some of our panel members, and then depending on how we go time-wise, I may put a further couple of questions to the panel. And what we will do after my summary, we're going to end today's session with what I think is a really wonderful way of doing it, because we've talked a lot about the challenges, etc. But what we want to leave you with today is a show reel, which actually is very powerful. It sort of cuts across the spectrum of the different businesses that the entrepreneurs are doing. And I think that'd be a really wonderful way for us to end today. So we will do that further on. So if I could hand over to you, Sarah, for the questions, please. It takes a moment to unmute.
Hi, sorry, slight technical hitch there. So we have a question to Beth from Katie Petherick, UKRI Innovate UK. Can you go into more detail about how programmes are inaccessible? Are there common themes that organisations can improve on?
Yeah, so I think, I'm just checking I'm unmuted, yeah. So I think the main thing about accessibility is just sort of asking the question about access needs. And that sounds really obvious, but it's amazing how few programs do it, whether you're disability specific or mainstream, particularly mainstream. Just having a question, even on application forms, about let us know if you have any access needs, and then following up if somebody does disclose that there's certain adjustments that need to be made, and seeing it rather than sort of the fear. I think often with organisations I work with, it's a fear of what might happen if somebody does ask for something and not being able to cater to it. But actually you will find disabled people are much more understanding than I think there's fear about, that if things can't be provided. But so often as well within that, digital accessibility is really key, and something that's often overlooked, as David was saying. So many people might just not even be getting to apply for things that are online and online forms if you haven't tested that things are accessible for screen readers and visual impairments and other such things. And I think a lot of that, it all comes down to awareness, because without knowing the barriers are there, you won't know how to adjust the programs and stuff. So within that, I think it's just really important to be bringing in either co-designing with disabled people, regardless of if it's something specifically for disabled people. This should be done for mainstream things anyway, because it makes making something more accessible isn't just beneficial for disabled people, it makes it a better user experience for everybody anyway. So there's no reason not to sort of do that stuff. So I think, yeah, just making sure that you're bringing in disabled people to give expertise when you're designing programs and things. And also, this sounds like such a basic point, but I've really noticed in the last year, in the same way you would pay any other professional for providing expertise and advice, paying a disabled person for their time for giving that expertise. I think sometimes people think that disabled people have tons of time around to help organisations to become more accessible, but actually it's sometimes important, I think, to recognise that in the same way you pay somebody else, it's important that just because it might be beneficial for that person to take part in the programme, they're actually making your service better as well by doing that. So I think, as it was sort of mentioned in the chat as well, seeing these improvements as an opportunity rather than a challenge, seeing them as opportunities to just make a more inclusive programme that will benefit everybody. But yeah, I think particularly, sorry, I'll wrap up now, but particularly when it comes to inaccessibility, there's lots of things that if people just were aware, like I've gone to accelerating incubator programs where in person, where it's been, you're expected to share a room with other people and there's nothing, you're provided accommodation, but then there's no sort of awareness. I think part of the issue was there was no females on the board of organising the programme anyway, but there was no awareness there that might be barriers for certain people. And it's just that thing of having like a diversity of thought within the people designing it as well that's sometimes really important. So yeah, I think that just that awareness and asking the question about access needs would be the main sort of takeaway thing that I'd say.
Thank you, Beth.
Okay, we just had a point raised to Beth from Mette Westander, founder director of the Disabled Students UK, and she was agreeing that it's so important to build the right business ecosystems to mitigate or negate the structural obstacles to business, building for entrepreneurs with disabilities. And the next question now is for David Walsh. How should the universities be incentivized to do more to put entrepreneurs at the centre? How do people elect to join?
Yeah, I think, thank you. I think, universities already do quite a bit in terms of diversity and inclusion, but not, it seems to me, much on disability, actually, which is a bit disappointing. And I think there's a big focus to spread the attributes of having good entrepreneurial qualities across the university, but not necessarily, and I've seen it in the chat, to define, what an entrepreneur actually is. Okay, we've had famously, haven't we, Elon Musk talking about his Asperger's, but who knew about that? But it kind of explains a lot. So I think that there's more that universities can do, and I think they're in a very good position to do it. I'm not criticizing them at all, because there's so much going on, and actually they do punch above their weight, because they do a lot of work on very tight budgets, actually, and they've got lots and lots of difficult priorities to come around to do that. But I think that my view about this is that we should take best practice of what we're seeing with like the Patchwork Hub and other communities and social enterprises that are trying to enable disabled entrepreneurs. We should get some academic input to that, I think, like with Birkbeck and so on. But we should try and, as I say, we should create a different type of accelerator. We should stop trying to, as I say, knock on that door. We should try and invite people in where we set the agenda, where we set the program, and where we are looking for like-minded people to become mentors who understand about accessibility issues, etc., like Beth was saying, and other issues to do with challenges with monies and benefits and so on. And we should create that as the center and not necessarily look to the academic institutions to do that for us, in my opinion. I think we should put it on its head, okay? And but I do feel that in the end, and we've had some comments again in the chat, that perhaps the disabled label is not helping, okay, as well, okay? I think you are an entrepreneur, full stop, you know? You are creating value. Where does this disability come in that? You know, where does that mention that if you're a wealth creator, whether it's to cover your own costs or other people's, where does that say disabled? Okay, so I think there is some work to be done around that and the conceptions of really an entrepreneur it is inclusive. It's possible for everyone from whatever background or wherever physical or mental challenges. We all have it in us to, you know, to be able to, you know, make that step. I'm not sure I've answered the question. I've rambled a bit, but I'll put you back to Jacqueline. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think the exciting thing is that, you know, it's a wonderful thing to have that route to the APPG, because I think this is where we're going to start seeing some of these things really taking shape, particularly around whatever we're going to call it going forward. But absolutely. Sarah, any further questions? We've got probably another 5 minutes before I summarise.
Yes, we've got another question for David Halabiski. On the point of scaling, Sam Everard is in the audience. Sorry, I'm just reading from a text here. I do apologise. The question is from Sam Everard. What ideas could the UK best adopt? And this is regarding a point on scaling up. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I think that every country needs to do more to learn from each other. There are some great examples. And one of the innovative ones that I've seen that I haven't really seen so much in the UK, but it could be that I'm not in the UK, so my visibility is not so good. But, you know, like I was saying earlier, this partnership approach, and there's some really interesting approaches being used right now. In Germany, for example, there is a program called Enterability. And, you know, it's entering into the ecosystem, and they've decided to say ability rather than disability. So Enterability. And it's about helping entrepreneurs with disabilities basically become more embedded within the local ecosystem, to help them build networks, to help them strengthen their relationships with investors, lenders, other support providers. And it started as a local project, and it's been expanding throughout the country because it's had some quite positive results in terms of the business performance metrics that are coming out. But you see similar types of things elsewhere. There are actually business incubators and accelerators, as we've been talking about, in Australia, that are designed and co-designed by, I'll call them disability organizations. And so they're right at the middle. They decided they wanted to build an accelerator program, and so they did it. They involved other actors to help them, but it was done as a social enterprise operated by people with disability. And that is a bit of the same approach as the German example that I mentioned, where it's really driven by people from within the disability community. And we increasingly see this across OECD countries. Canada, for example, often uses it now. And I haven't seen this approach used to the same extent in the UK as I have seen in other countries. So I'll put that out as one example of what I think the UK could do a little bit more. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. I think I've actually got one for Eva, if that's okay. And I think that will conclude our formal Q&A, but there have been so many comments and other things in the chat that we will respond to. And as we said at the start of the event, there will be, Helen, could you just pop back on again, just so I get this right? Are you doing a report, or is it a blog in terms of what we've presented today?
Isabel will be writing a blog, and that will go on the CIMR website, but the recording will be available. I'm not sure whether that's going to be sent to everybody that's participated or signed up, or whether that will be on the website as well, but I can check on that.
All right, thank you very much. So just to Eva, really, and this is I suppose a little bit broader than what we're looking at today, because obviously this is the first event, and there's going to be a subsequent event looking at entrepreneurship and ethnic minority groups. Are you seeing similarities here when you're listening to the two communities in terms of what the barriers are?
Thanks for the question, Jacqueline. I think it's a great question. I won't talk so much about barriers, but something that came to my mind when I listened to David Halabiski was this partnership approach. And we're currently working on a project where we're doing a review of the barriers faced by ethnic minority businesses in entrepreneurship, so in starting and running a business. And as part of that review, we've kind of looked at international best practice. And what we found that some of the kind of best examples of supporting ethnic minority businesses, and one of them happens to be in Canada as well, is where organizations from across sectors come together and through that kind of partnership approach try to exchange knowledge and deliver more intensive, more tailored, more comprehensive forms of support. And very often that is also kind of led by government. So I've just seen that comment in the chat that we can't expect much from the UK government, but I think it's one of the things that is missing is some kind of leadership on this issue. Ideally that would be from government as well. I think we need a strong message on, inclusive entrepreneurship is important for everybody, and that we need to include people from all sections of society in starting and running a business.
Thank you so much, Eva. So I think what I'd like to do now is just summarise. First of all, as well, it's incredibly insightful from our panellists. So I think what I'd like to say really is we've had some very comprehensive overviews from the panel with very clear insight into the emerging sector, building on the work of the APPG. A clear recommendation for the need to conduct further research in this area. I learned very early on in my career that as we take things forward, it's important to have the academic validation that helps significantly when you're wanting to implement policy changes. This next bit is really important. So the creation of a co-designed pathway which combines practical disability-related support, health and well-being with startup and scale-up programmes. Ideally, sat within BAYS, not where it currently sits within DWP. Very strong recommendation in terms of changes to current DWP pathways related to legacy benefits, which, if we can achieve that, will increase inclusive economic growth. Equitable access to finance, measuring visibility beyond turnover. Now, I think if there's anybody who wants to make any final comment just before I go on to the thank yous for the end of the session today. Okay, so what I'd like to do at this point is just to say a massive thank you for those of us that work in this sector. This event is huge. It really is helping to change the narrative, and the comments that you've seen, it's not an easy thing to do. It's a very challenging thing to do, but actually it is achievable. So I'd like, in my conclusion now, to thank Orla for all the logistical stuff of pulling this event together. Helen Lawson-Smith, obviously, for her wonderful desire to work in this sector and the research that she's doing at Birkbeck. Beth, for the wonderful graphics that you created for the event. Sarah, who is actually my support worker, who spends time in the machine at various stages. So thank you so much today. And again, I will thank again Asha, because, again, just a huge amount of work has been put to pull this together today. And then what I would like to do, as we stated, I don't know if you want to say anything, Helen, at the end before we do conclude and we go out with the film.
Yes, well, I'd like to thank you, Jacqueline, because your work is inspirational. You've pulled this panel together. You've put so much effort into it, and your insights are amazing. You've worked really hard on this to make it the success that it has been. So thank you for this and for all the work that you do, supporting the APPG's brilliant work and pulling all the people together in the various committees, like people like David. It's wonderful. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. It is a passion, and I think, in part because of my own experience, but I do believe that we can achieve this. So, that just pushed me along. So we are due to conclude at, I think we've got 7 minutes, and if I remember correctly, the video will take us through possibly about 4 or 5 of those. So again, thank you to all our panel members, and thank you to everybody that's attended the session today. Please do, I think we do have a few further slides, Sarah, that talks about the next event that Birkbeck are doing. We might put that up after we've watched the film, just so if you wish to attend further events, you're able to. And I hope you found it very interesting. It's the start of the conversation. It's the continuation of changing the narrative. Please do watch the film. I do think when you actually see the wonderful businesses that our sector are creating, despite the mammoth hurdles they're actually presented with, I think it's a taste of the future if we can all co-design and collaborate. And thank you so much, everyone. Trying to find the press go button. I think it should have sound. Just give us a moment while we try to sort out the sound on this. We were doing so well. We've managed to navigate Zoom. If we don't manage to put the sound on, hopefully you will be able to access that, because we'll put it in the chat as well. And I'm sure it will be included in the blog. If we've no sound, because can somebody just confirm we have no sound, because I can't tell. But I'd just like, with the absence of sound, I'd just like to state that what this does show is the variety in the businesses, and also that the sector is made up of sole traders, limited companies, community interest companies, and any, practically any business you can imagine, from somebody that's running an art gallery, actually transports luxury cars, and so on. It's a wonderful thing to be involved in, and I'm delighted to be involved in today. Thank you.